It's now 2:45, and I believe that's when I said we'd start. So let's start things with fun. We'll begin. My name is Christopher Cassidy. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer for the Hum Law Firm. We are a small boutique law firm. We specialize in employment law. My role in the company is primarily to provide business guidance, and I provide the intake to invoice business process, as well as I do. My wife's the head of the firm, so I do some consulting work on the side as well. Obviously, today, for many companies, one of the fundamental issues is how to deal with the pandemic. And though I'm not in a position to give legal advice, that's what the lawyers do. On the business side, there are some critical things that touch on some of the changes wrought by the pandemic. And these are things that have both a business as well as at times a legal aspect. So for business owners and entrepreneurs, I think it's important to understand that while we're all pivoting to deal with the reality of the pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, there are some significant changes that will affect how employees are treated, as well as the hard reality of living in an advising. There's the organizer suggesting if you double click on the slides, you'll get a better view of it, I'm being told. So leaving the pandemic, really, as a business owner and as someone who manages a small business, it's important that you prepare for some of the hard changes that are going to be coming. Many companies are down, and they're going to unfortunately struggle as they leave. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things as a business that are advisable to do moving forward as we try to restart the economy and provide our employees with a viable path forward, as well as obviously the businesses that we own and employ them in. So let's move on to the first slide, and afterwards I'll leave a few minutes for questions. There we are. There we are. So this is me. I've been in the business world for about 20 years. I have a variety of experiences, mostly in telecom. Actually was part of a company that sold one of the first ever VoIP systems, probably in the world, though Nortel would only say North America, and sold one of the first, if not the first, Nortel wireless infrastructures in North America. 6 months later, Cisco bought the company that they were using, and it was very interesting to see how business can work. They cut Nortel off from support of their own products, so it was quite interesting. And in a world like that, in the pandemic, we need to keep in mind as business owners and managers that we have to work hard to inspire our workers with, I guess, confidence going forward, because these are obviously challenging times. So, until now, we've been primarily focused on managing in a difficult time. But as the economy reopens, I think it's fair to say most of us are trying our best to get back to work. Now, some businesses have been fortunate like ours. We saw a little downturn, certainly in work. As employment lawyers, we're under demand. The head of the firm, Lai King Hum, is quite prominent. She is what you might call a lawyer's lawyer. She holds appointments as a deputy judge, as well as an appointment from the Law Society. And our challenge has not been to find business, sadly, in the pandemic. Our challenge has been to provide, I guess, timely advice to people under increasing levels of stress and anxiety. Which really brings me to a question as you recover where your employees are. And if you think in terms of the idea of Kubler-Ross's theory of grief. Have people got to acceptance? Have they moved past that? And are you in a position with yourselves, your employees, and those you may have had to lay off, where you can begin to move forward? And these are hard questions, to be frank, for many business owners and employees. But as a company that deals with people in the midst of this on a daily basis, it is important that you step back and assess how best you can move forward constructively for yourself and for those who are part of the business. So that's one of the things everyone needs to sort of do and figure out as you look forward where your place is and how you can maximize the recovery if you've been affected. So obviously there have been CERB layoffs. That funding really has, I think, been helpful initially, but there are major risks going forward. So businesses need to step back and understand that if they have let people go or if people had to be laid off, they need to think through the implications of that moving forward. How many of the people can you bring back? And what is your status as an employer regarding your employees on a contractual basis? Now, I know I worked for a small business for many years. We were bought by Bell. And, that was good and bad. In the end, Bell released us all. But the truth is, I didn't have a signed contract. I had been hired on handshake. I was there 11 years. It was a good job. The reality was when I was let go from Bell, because I didn't have a contract, I had a significantly larger package than those who may have signed a contract. Part of what businesses do from a liability and risk management perspective is you need to have contracts in order to limit what you owe in a termination or severance situation. The hard reality is not only did 8.6 million Canadians apply for CERB, but a recent estimate is there's probably 3 to 4 million still on it, and a third of those are in Ontario, which means that a third of the workforce is likely presently still on CERB, and they're moving quickly to employment insurance. At that point, when that has happened, there will be changes to their relationships with their employers. Now, we're all pivoting. Until September 3rd, the government of Ontario had said that they were going to effectively return to normal rules on September 4th. On the afternoon of September 3rd, they changed their mind and pushed out some of those rules till early January. But as an employer, it would not be wise to wait until January to find out whether or not your employees who are not coming back are going to, how shall I put it, ask you to pay for the severance. That's a plan you need to begin to develop now. Many employers haven't started, and this may endanger the viability of some businesses. I want you to imagine a moment where you think that your termination clauses protect you. 90% of termination clauses don't because of a recent decision as of June. And that decision means that for most people, the cost of losing those employees that you didn't want to lose. I mean, none of us want to be in this situation. But the reality is if you're down 10, 20, 30, or 40%, you will owe terminations and severance to those people. What's the cost going to be? Well, as a real world example, one employer thought it was 5 weeks. It was 6 months. And that's the model that's going to affect every single person with a handshake agreement. And frankly, because of the recent decision of the appeals court, it's going to affect, some people say, 90% of contracts. Put another way, if you have a contract with an employee and you haven't had an employment lawyer look at it within the last 2 months, the odds are it's no longer of any value. And that is a real challenge. So it's important that you step back and look at the hard reality of where you are. Understand if there are employees that you can bring back, you need a strategy. And if there are those that you will not be able to bring back, you're also going to need a strategy for the good of the business. Imagine having 5 long-term employees who earn 50,000. That could be 100,000 per employee, depending on the nature of your relationships and your contracts. Going forward, working conditions need to be assessed. In other words, you have to comply with all the new pandemic rules. It's not going to be enough to say you tried. You have to protect your employees. You have to protect your clients. In terms of working conditions at Hum Law, we have people who don't want to come back, and we're not asking them to. In fact, we went virtual on March 9th, and we intend to remain virtual until the pandemic is over. We have employees who have children, and they're going to be teaching at home. That's their decision. We're fortunate in being able to do this without hurting the business. But these are questions you need to think about as you begin to bring people back. And in general, we would say to you, you know what, try to be kind. Try to not force people back who don't want to come back. At the end of the day, though, you will have to make those decisions. So you need to think through how you're going to approach them. You do not want to be the company with the PR nightmare of spreading COVID. So take time to think through how your physical site is configured and enforce the rules that you're supposed to enforce. Don't let people not wear masks. It's not to your advantage. And if you want the answer on that, I would suggest you go to our website or check out the regulations for your municipalities. Have an enforcement plan. Take time to develop one. Make sure your employees understand you're protecting them and your clients. Understand the health risks for which you may become liable. So these are questions that a lot of employers are not used to thinking of. Most of us don't have plants with WMIS issues and issues around high risk, but today we all do. So our advice is take time, consult with the proper professionals, and figure out how you're going to reopen and minimize the risk to your employees and your clients. This is to everyone's advantage. Finally, I want you to think about, how do I restructure if I have to? How do I maximize my income using students? Now, as a small business, we had no problems with getting clients during the pandemic because we're employment workers. But we did have some problems collecting. In the end, that resolved itself. But for many businesses, leveraging these programs is a critical part of recovery. So take time to plan it out. Also understand if you can't bring people back, you need to understand the implications of wrongful dismissal claims. In order to do that, consult with an employment lawyer. Understand that if you have 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 or 30% of your staff back, it will not, at the end of the day, be free for them to walk away. You need to plan for that. Larger companies typically have budgets. Smaller companies typically don't face this type of a crisis. But at this point, it's to your advantage and to the advantage of the employees who you can remember, that you plan for how you're going to rebuild the infrastructure and your relationship with your employees when some of them cannot come back to businesses that are suffering significant downturns. I hope you're not. But the reality is, for many companies, this is simply what is going to be. So going forward, our advice is as follows. Take time to plan out your recovery. Don't rely on constantly shifting pivots to change the legal landscape in your favor. In the short term, that's what's happening. But in the long term, those legal rights of employees and employers and those obligations are going to be enforced. So it's important that as a business leader, you take the time to plan these things going forward. That's what advice we can give to you today. Appreciate your time. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, though I'll be honest, I'm not sure how to take them. The question, what is the first step a business should take if you're concerned about contracts, and what do you look for? Well, the first step is make sure you have contracts. If you don't have contracts, frankly, you're at high risk of significant damage to the business due to the cost of that. If you do have contracts and they're not very recent, have someone review them. In the case that we spoke of with the person 5 weeks, 6 months, they didn't have contracts. But that same situation would happen if an employer with contracts that were found to be invalid. It's estimated that 90% of existing contracts were made valid by the work scale decision, which occurred on June 17th. So unless you've revised your contract since June 17th, there's an awful high risk that you're exposed. Take time to have those reviewed. If you just hired on a handshake, that model simply isn't going to work. It's a high liability strategy. So you need to minimize your liabilities going forward. Again, you should consult with someone who can help you put proper contracts in place for your employees. The question is, what should we look for in a law firm to help? Well, look for someone who's focused on employer side, that has a background in that. It's important. Look for someone who fits into your financial model. Look for someone who's able to respond promptly and quickly to your requirements. If you want to pay $2,000 an hour, you can go to a larger firm, or look for small boutique firms such as a home law firm, where you'll find experienced lawyers, probably at a price you can afford. More importantly, look for people who are focused on the pandemic. Review their website, see that they're keeping up. Things are changing. As I said, on September 4th, there was supposed to be one rule. On September 3rd, they changed the rules. I want to thank everyone for attending. I wish you luck as we all work together to recover from this pandemic. Have a good day.